Good afternoon, adventurers. I have a more standard build video for you today than I usually go for. Usually, I often use builds to illustrate a point that I'm making in a video, rather than making the video for the build itself. We're going to change that up a little bit today, because I have had a build rattling around in my brain for some time, and I think it's time to finally put it to paper, or film in this case. The vision that I have for the character is someone that I've wanted to play for a while, is a Githyanki riding on a red dragon. A classic combination. I want to capture that aesthetic, that vibe, in a character that I'm playing as. We can do that with the Ranger. Now, I could wait until level 3, but it's probably pretty obvious to anyone who's familiar with the subclass from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, the Drake Warden Ranger. That's obviously going to be the center of the build. The Drake Warden does come with some important questions. First and foremost, why the bloody heck didn't WotC make the Drake go during the Ranger's turn? The Beastmaster Ranger does it. Simula Akrams do it. Maybe like one or two other things. It's very uncommon, I get that. But for a creature that's very much supposed to be a mount for the Ranger, it has two features that allow it to be used as a mount when it's medium, and allow it to be used as a flying mount when it's large at level 15. It doesn't go during the Ranger's turn, so the Ranger has to either ready attacks or use ranged weapons only in a lot of cases, or something of that nature, because the Drake always goes right after the Ranger in the initiative order. So that's unfortunate. We can use it as a controlled mount, but that means it won't be able to attack, only dash, disengage, and dodge, like any other controlled mount can. It does have some unique features that it can use, like its reaction to add a d6 of damage to our Ranger's attack or another ally's attack, as long as that ally is within 30 feet of the Drake. So that's cool. We get a little extra damage that way, sort of semi-passively. And I believe in the current iteration of the rules, a controlled mount can still make opportunity attacks, but I'm not entirely sure. The mounted combat rules say that the creature can only take specific actions during your turn when you're riding it. It doesn't say anything about reactions. So it's my belief that op attacks are on the table. Even if your group doesn't run it that way, that's fine. It still has that reaction to add a d6 to your attacks. Now, we could grab the Charger feat so we can deal extra damage with our one attack if we use readied attacks and then have the Drake move at an enemy. Even if something else is moving us, we are still moving 10 feet toward a creature. At least that's how it's been explained to me. That is, to the best of my understanding, the way that feat works. We don't have to use our own movement, as far as I know. But an extra d8 of damage isn't going to be worth giving up an extra attack in basically any situation, so still not a good trade-off, especially because it costs a feat to do. Giving up the Drake's attacks to use it as a controlled mount isn't actually the biggest cost, though, because the Drake has a worse attack bonus and deals markedly less damage than we are going to, and even then a Primal Companion from the Beastmaster Ranger would. Beastmaster Companions also get a second attack at level 11. The Drake doesn't. It gets an extra d6 at certain levels, but it still doesn't quite keep up, unfortunately. So using it as a control mount is kind of the move anyway. I'm talking between 1 and 3 d6s plus our proficiency bonus. So at level 3, when we get the subclass, we're talking an average of 5.5 damage, which is not terrible for a bonus action at that level. But for example, a monk is already doing that kind of damage just every turn at level 1. 5.5 is the average damage on a d10 with no modifiers, so we're going to beat that no problem. Level 7 is an average of about 10 damage, and level 15, when it gets its third d6, it's an average of about 15.5 damage. Capping out at 16.5 at level 17 when our proficiency bonus goes up for the last time. It's not a ton of damage. It's not the worst for a bonus action, but giving it up in order to use the Beast's movement, not the Beast, the Drake's movement, and I'm used to Beastmaster talk, but giving up that damage to use our Drake as a controlled mount, fly it around with the dash, disengage, and hide actions as normal, and use its movement speed on our turn is going to be a pretty good thing anyway. Mounted combat is, in my opinion, pretty underrated in 5e. I actually like it quite a bit, but it is pretty hard to keep a mount alive, especially at mid to high levels. If you have something like a warhorse or a mastiff, it's going to be a challenge keeping that thing alive. But the Drake has scaling health and armor class as well. So from a defensive standpoint, the Drake is actually a very capable controlled mount. And that's ignoring the fact that at level 15 it gets to fly with us on its back, which is incredible. You can't buy a flying mount, as far as I know, unless you have a really nice DM. So having a Drake, being able to fly, with a bunch more hit points than most mounts would have, I see this as an absolute win. Is it going to be the deadliest or crazy, most effective-ist character in the game? Probably not. But that's not what we're going for. We're going for the coolness of having a dragon. And even as a controlled mount, starting at level 11, we can have the Drake breathe the dragon breath with the Drake's Breath feature, spending, well, it's free the first time, but after that, spending a 3rd level spell slot to deal a cone of elemental damage. We can do that starting from ourselves, or we can do that originating from the Drake. So flavor-wise, we could have the Drake breathing fire, or lightning, or acid, or whatever we want on people, even though it's a controlled mount, because it's not actually the one attacking. That's our action being used. But that's all getting a little ahead of myself. Now that we've talked about the Drake and its role in our fancy duo here, let's talk about the rider. I've always enjoyed the aesthetic of someone mounted on a flying mount, especially if it's a dragon, wielding a lance and a shield and diving in headfirst against the enemy. And ever since I played through Baldur's Gate 3 12 times, I have wanted to make a Githyanki riding a red dragon. It's just cool, and you can't tell me it's not. Plus, lances actually fit in a really interesting spot in D&D 5e 2024. Lances have the heavy reach and two-handed properties, though they ignore the two-handed property if we're riding on a mount. That means they are the #1 highest damage one-handed weapons in the game, monk damage notwithstanding, and they can apply both the Great Weapon Master bonus damage, as they are heavy weapons, and the dueling fighting style bonus damage, because they are one-handed weapons. How crazy is that? Each of those on their own might not be a huge amount of damage, unless you're higher level. Great Weapon Master does scale with proficiency bonus, but having both, even at low levels, could give us a nice chunk. And when we're mounted, we can wield a lance alongside a shield for extra armor class. So, to the build. We have our species, Githyanki, that we have already decided. In case anyone's not aware, they have stats in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, a book that came out a few years ago, which was printed under the 2014 rules, but we can still use them. Just ignore the ability score increases like you would for any other older, non-reprinted species. That means we can still get their Invisible Mage Hand and their Misty Step and all that good stuff. Speaking of backgrounds, where we get our ability score increases, if you've been watching the channel, you know I always advocate for customizing backgrounds, using old backgrounds and tacking on the new mechanics to them, things like that, so that we can get strength, which we're going to need for our lance attacks, and a bit of wisdom and possibly constitution, a little bit of dexterity we need for multiclassing. Surprise, surprise, we're not going to be 20 levels of Ranger. Strength is paramount, though. It would really benefit us to get that up to 17 at the start, so we can bump it up to 18 at level 4. 5, technically. We'll get there. As for Origin Feat, I am of the mind that Healer is going to be the best option here, as it'll help us patch up our Drake. Remember, the Drake gets hit dice equal to 1d10 per Ranger level, so it starts out with 3 and gets more from there. We can use those to heal it. We also get to re-roll 1s on any healing dice from the Healer feat or from our healing spells. As a Ranger, we do get Cure Wounds, so that'll help some of the time at least. If you're in a campaign where you're not allowed to customize your background or use the old ones, etc., then there are a handful of origin feats that are going to be good for us. Magic Initiate is just fine, Alert is great, Skilled is good, Tough is also good, especially because our ability score is going to be a little divided, and we won't have the most Constitution, although having 2 creatures and also a d10 hit dice will help make up for that. If you're not customizing, I recommend the Farmer background, as it comes with Tough, and we can also get Strength and Wisdom. The Guard background has Strength, Wisdom, and the Alert feat, and Sailor has Strength and Wisdom, but comes with Tavern Brawler, which isn't going to be that useful. So those are going to be the best options for our Ranger. Otherwise, Entertainer gets the Musician origin feat, which is just a good origin feat overall. Artisan and Soldier get Strength, but their origin feats, Crafter and Savage Attacker respectively, aren't as useful for us. Not bad necessarily, but just not that good either. So, for our starting stats, we're going to want 17 Strength, that is 15 with point buy plus 2 from our background, of course. If you're rolling for stats, just use your highest number here. 14 in Dexterity, with either just putting 14 in it from point buy or 13 plus 1 from our background, depending which one we took. 12 Constitution, like I said a moment ago, having the Drake to also take some damage for us, hopefully, and having a d10 hit die will help us not be too squishy. We could sacrifice some of our other stats to have more Constitution, but for only 1 HP more per level, I don't think it's really worth that sacrifice. 10 Intelligence, just because we'll have 2 extra points from point buy to dump somewhere. Could also put this in Charisma, but have you seen Get Yankee talk?
Abomination. This is your end.
14 Wisdom, which again, 13 plus 1 from our background, or just 14 with point buy, whichever one we didn't do for Dexterity. And of course, 8 Charisma. Again, Get Yankee. If you'd rather have Charisma than Intelligence, by all means go for it. And so, with the basics squared away, let's get into our class, level 1. We're going to start with the level of Fighter. But you could have seen that one coming. We get Second Wind, we get the Dueling Fighting Style right off the bat at level 1, which I love. And we'll get access to Heavy Armor, which is going to complement our Strength weapon usage a little bit better than Medium Armor would. And Rangers don't get Heavy Armor normally. That's actually the only reason we have to start as a level 1 fighter, instead of taking a little dip later, which is a little unfortunate, but we also get Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is never bad, especially for a spellcaster. Normally I don't fret too much about medium versus heavy armor. Plate armor only has 1 more point of armor class than half plate, assuming you have 14 dexterity. It's really not that big a deal, but there is a trick that we can do later that will not work with medium armor. And we also get plenty of weapon masteries right off the bat. Now, from levels 1 through 7, Fighter 1, Ranger 6, we are going to be using a spear and shield. You could also just use a lance two-handed if you want, but that would waste the dueling fighting style. And I just like to keep the aesthetic consistent with spear and shield, and then once we're mounted, we upgrade to a lance. Next level, we can start down the Ranger path. It gives us spellcasting right off the bat at Ranger 1 now, super nice. And Rangers get some swell spells like Jump, Lungstrider, Cure Wounds, Goodberry, and Fog Cloud. We also get 2 uses of Hunter's Mark without spell slots. We can also cast it with spell slots if we want, but 2 uses is probably going to be enough. Most of the time. And you can say what you want about the spell and about Rangers relying on the spell, but it is actually pretty good at low levels. We do get more weapon masteries at this level as well. Not that we need like 5 of them, but we have them. Ranger level 2 gives us Deft Explorer, which means we learn 2 languages and gain expertise in 1 skill. We also get a second fighting style, and there are a few great options. Blind fighting is always really good. Interception is great for mounted characters though, and even though we're not there yet, we can still use its benefit if we're standing next to an ally, or the Drake itself, even if we're not mounted. The protection style is also good, offering disadvantage as long as a character stands within 5 feet of us until the start of our next turn, but I like interception because it guaranteed works. We could still get hit, or our ally could still get hit with disadvantage, but the damage reduction will always have an effect. That's just my own taste, though. Also, if we get our hands on a Saddle of the Cavalier, a magic item, the mount will have disadvantage on attacks against it anyway. That's just part of what that magic item does. So the fighting style won't be nearly as useful in that case. If you're playing Adventure League, or if you have a DM who's open to having items requested, or if you have the ability to buy or trade for magic items in your campaign, basically if you can guaranteed get a Saddle of the Cavalier, and DMs, if you have a mounted character, give them a Saddle of the Cavalier. But if you have the option, go with that instead of the protection fighting style. Ranger level 3, total level 4 of course, gives us our subclass. Finally, we have our Drake. It is the core feature of the build. It has 20 hit points at this level, which isn't bad next to our 32 hit points. And it can fight on its own for a while, effectively giving us a bonus action attack. Even if it's not terribly strong, it is at least a good option until we can ride the Drake. Ranger 4 brings us our first feat. And I am actually second guessing what my script says here. Now, I was originally going to say to take Polar Master here, as it does work with spears and with lances, as lances are weapons that have both the reach and heavy properties. That's one of the criteria for the feat. But I'm actually second guessing that now, because we can use our Drake to get an attack as a bonus action, effectively, as a ranger's bonus action, I should say. So the bonus action attack from Polar Master isn't actually as important. And there are other feats we can take. So I'm going to actually revise my script on the fly a little bit and say take Heavy Armor Master here. That'll help us not take as much damage. Again, that's going to compensate for our little bit lower constitution than we'd like. Not taking as much damage from each attack that hits us is going to be super good. That feat also bumps our strength up to 18. That's why we wanted to start with that 17, so that we can get that sweet, crispy +4 modifier at this level. And since we got this a level late, at level 5 instead of level 4, our proficiency bonus is +3 now, which means the Heavy Armor Master feat will be that much more effective. At Ranger 5 Fighter 1, we get extra attack and second level spells. So, a big upgrade. We can grab Aid to get us and our Drake some more hit points, as well as one of our other companions. Magic Weapon is a good spell now, especially that it doesn't require concentration. And if we don't yet have a Magic Spear, or later a Magic Lance, that can help us do a little more damage and have a little more accuracy, which are both great things, with a low cost of a spell slot. We can also pick up Pass Without Trace, Spike Growth, and or Summon Beast, because those are just good spells as well. Ranger 6 gives us a climb speed and a swim speed, which we probably won't be using that long, but they are nice to have on hand. It would also give us a +10 bonus to our walking speed, but we're in heavy armor, so we don't actually benefit from that. That's not going to matter very soon, though. At level 8, which is to say Ranger 7, we can finally ride the Drake and become a proper mounted combatant. That phrasing is foreshadowing. It's the only time in the whole game we can be a medium creature and ride a medium creature, so that's cool. We also get to switch up to the lance now that we are mounted on another creature, dealing a d10 of damage instead of a d6. It also means we have reach. Even though we're still just taking up one medium space, we can now reach 10 feet. The Drake has a 40-foot move speed, so missing out on our +10 speed last level isn't actually a huge loss, because we have a 40-foot move speed on the Drake anyway. We can also dismount and send the Drake to fly places without us, even though we can't fly with them. And at this level, the Drake gains a d6 of damage matching its chosen element, for a total of 2d6 plus proficiency bonus. 2d6 plus 3 at this level. If we had taken Polar Master, that was going to be slightly higher than our Polar back end attack, but we are going to be riding our Drake most of the time, so that probably won't get too much use. At Ranger level 8, we are going to get our second feat, and at this point I'm just going to talk about the other feats that we're going to get throughout the build, because the order that we get them is going to be a little subjective. If we want to favor damage, we can take Polar Master here. That gives us our bonus action attack. There are things we can do as a ranger with our bonus action, and there are things we can do as a ranger to get more damage, so it's not super necessary. It does also give us our reaction attacks when someone approaches within our 10-foot reach, though, which is nice. So that's a good option. Another thing we can take to prioritize damage is Great Weapon Master, adding damage to all the attacks we make as part of the attack action. That would not apply to a bonus action attack or a reaction attack, though that feat would also give us the option to attack as a bonus action with the full D10 no less, if we reduce a creature to 0 hit points or get a critical hit. But the one that calls to me the loudest at this level, because we just became able to ride on our Drake as a mount, is of course Mounted Combatant. That gives the Drake effectively evasion while we're riding it, right? It can take only half damage if it fails a dexterity saving throw against an effect, and no damage if it succeeds. That's huge. That's going to save it from tons of damage from things like Fireball, Lightning Bolt. The list is going to be too long if I start rattling them all off. So that's already great. We can also force attacks that hit the Drake to hit us instead. And that's where Heavy Armor Master really comes in. If something hits our Drake and we don't want it to hit our Drake, we can make it hit us instead and get reduced by an amount equal to our proficiency bonus. Those things work well together. So hypothetically, if our Drake gets hit for 12 damage, let's say, I'm just making up a number, we can force that to hit us instead and take 8 damage. Way better. I'm a fan of how those things stack, so that's the one I would recommend we take at this level. The feat also gives us advantage on attacks against creatures smaller than the mount. For now, that's only small and tiny creatures. It's nice when it comes up. It's not going to come up all the time. Plenty of stuff we fight is going to be medium or larger. Mounted Combatant can also get us +1 to Wisdom. Now you might notice I didn't say Strength. That's because out of 4 feats, they can all give us Strength. That's an option for all 4 of them. But starting at 17, we don't need Strength from all of them. So we're going to take Wisdom for 1, and that's Mounted Combatant. So my plan is to get Mounted Combatant first, and then probably Great Weapon Master after that, maybe Polar Master last. I might switch those two. I haven't fully decided, truth be told. And if you're playing this build at home, or a similar one, feel free to swap all these feats around to whatever suits your playstyle best. In any case, Ranger 9 brings with it expertise in 2 more skills, and 3rd level spells. Conjure Animals is actually quite good. It doesn't require any sort of action to move the animals around turn after turn, so that will not impact our action economy at all after the initial cast. Conjure Barrage can give us some very nice AoE in a cone that is twice as long as our Dragon Breath feature, which we don't actually have until a couple more levels from now. So having an area of effect attack at all is already pretty huge for a Gish type character. Daylight, Revivify, Summon Fae, heck, even Water Breathing, now that we can all cast as rituals, these are all good things to have on hand. I also want to mention that the Magic Weapon spell, when upcast to a 3rd level spell, instead of 2nd, gives us +2 to our weapon, attack and damage rolls, instead of +1. That's a pretty small increase in spell slot investment for double the benefit. I like it a lot. Getting a +3 bonus from the spell requires a 6th level spell slot, so that is beyond our reach forever as Rangers, unfortunately. Leveling up to 10 in Ranger gives us an ability with which we can give ourselves temporary hit points a handful of times per day, again helping out the survivability. Love to see it. We can also decrease our exhaustion level by 1 at the end of any short rest in addition to long rests. Huge when that stuff comes up. Unfortunately, that doesn't apply to the Drake. That can still get exhaustion levels, so that's a bit of a bummer, but at least the Ranger can do something about it more easily. Ranger 11 gets us our Drake Breath AoE. It is smaller than Conjure Barrage at only a 30-foot cone instead of a 60-foot cone, but it does do a little bit more damage. 8d6 from the Drake's Breath is an average of 28. If you use Fireball, you're probably well aware of that. And Conjure Barrage deals 5d8, which is an average of 22.5, so about 5.5 more damage. Not a whole ton, given the smaller AoE, but when we don't need a huge cone, the extra damage can be nice. Also, when we hit level 15, our damage from Drake's Breath will increase by 2d6 permanently. even if we don't spend a bigger resource to use it. And that brings the average damage up to 35, which is a pretty significant jump up from 22.5. We can even have the cone originate from the ranger, like I said earlier, or the drake, even if the drake isn't very close to us. So that's nice too. We can send it over somewhere and have it breathe if we're not mounted on it. If we are mounted on it, then it doesn't really matter too much either way. Ranger level 12 comes with it a feat, of course. As I talked about earlier, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty because I already did that. Take either Polearm Master or Great Weapon Master, whichever one speaks to you more. Great Weapon Master is liable to give us a little bit more damage. Ranger 13 gets Relentless Hunter, which is fine at best, and 4th level spells. I'm a fan of Guardian of Nature from Xanathar's Guide to Everything myself, getting advantage on all our attacks, and an extra d6 as we are using Strength. Sort of like Hunter's Mark, but also we get advantage. It's like being level 17, except we don't have to waste every bonus action moving it around. But the Player's Handbook also has some good options, like Conjure Woodland Beings, Stone Skin even though it costs gold pieces and requires concentration, reducing bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt to us by our proficiency bonus, which at this level is 5, and then having it because of resistance means that we won't take very much damage at all from weapons and similar things. Luckily, we're proficient in Constitution saving throws from starting fighter, so when we do get hit, that DC 10 Constitution saving throw shouldn't be too big an issue. Ranger 14 gives us Nature's Veil, allowing us to turn invisible a handful of times per day until the start of our next turn, which is huge. It gives most enemies disadvantage on attacks against us, because most enemies won't be able to hit us. Obviously, things like Blind Sight and True Sight get around that. But against everything else, they'll have disadvantage on attacks against us. We'll have advantage on attacks against them. It's that simple. Unfortunately, this doesn't also turn the Drake invisible. That would be crazy nice. And Ranger 15 is the big one. Our Drake becomes large size and can use his fly speed or her fly speed, their fly speed, while we're riding them. Their attacks get 1 more d6 if that matters. We can also use a reaction starting at this level to give either ourselves or the Drake resistance to 1 instance of damage. Fantastic if we get meteor swarmed or something. And there's no limit to the amount of times we can do that. It costs our reaction, so once per round, presumably. At this level, our Drake also gets their 2d6 extra breath damage, like I said earlier, so just a pile of goodies all around. Ranger 16 gets us the last of the feats that we already discussed. Whichever one you didn't take before, just take it now. And our proficiency bonus goes up for the last time, as we are character level 17. Because of that, both our Great Weapon Master damage and our Heavy Armor Master damage reduction are at their peak. Ranger level 17 gets Precise Hunter. Advantage on attacks against our Hunter's Mark target is not nothing, and for a spell we get to cast for free a bunch of times every day, and also cast as a first level spell, we have plenty of those spell slots. Anytime we have something that we really need to be dead, it's not a very high cost to get advantage on attacks against it. The d6 of extra damage from that spell isn't huge, but if we're not concentrating on something else anyway, there are worse things we could do. We also get our highest level spells here, the level 5s. Conjure Volley is good, and really gives me the feel of a battlefield commander, commanding a legion of archers to rain hell on the enemy. It doesn't even require a thrown or ranged weapon anymore, so we can just point our lance at something and a 40-foot cylinder of death rains down on top of them. It deals more damage than Conjure Barrage, and it deals roughly comparable damage to our Drake Breath in a much wider area. The average on 8d8 damage is 36, so it's actually slightly better than our Drake Breath anyway. Greater Restoration is also a great one to have on hand, although if we have a cleric or a bard or something in the party, it might not be necessary for us to take it also. Then again, if the cleric gets petrified, it's gonna be down to us to save them. Ranger 18 gives us 30 feet of blind sight, which is rad, especially if we didn't take the blind fighting style at Ranger 2. Either way, bumping it up to 30 feet of blind sight is going to be really nice. Again, unfortunately, the Drake doesn't also get that, but it's not really making attacks anyway. And lastly, character level 20, Ranger level 19, we get our real capstone because the level 20 Ranger thing sucks, an epic boon. Boon of Recovery is really good, a strong defensive option, as is the Boon of Fortitude, simply giving us more HP and more healing. Although with our low constitution modifier, the extra healing isn't actually that much. That boon is better if we can get our hands on a Manual of Bodily Health, a magic item that can increase our constitution by 2, or an Amulet of Health, raising our constitution to a flat 19. If we have that, that's an extra 4 points of healing from every source, once per round, which could be a Goodberry spell for 50 HP. The boon of Spell Recall can be really nice on a half-caster, as most of our spell slots are 4th level and below anyway, so we have the potential, even though it's only a 25% chance each time we cast something, to save ourselves a spell slot. The boon of Fate isn't necessarily my favorite, but it could be useful in helping the Drake overcome an important saving throw once per fight, or once per short rest, whichever comes first. There are tons of really great epic boon feats, so you can really just pick your favorite at this level. And that's the build. We want to talk magic items real quick. Obviously, any magic lance is going to be a good fit. Magic armor, magic shield can get us more AC, possibly other effects. Having any sort of damage resistance is always good, and any item that our DM allows us to put on the Drake will also help. There is an item, very famously, at least in the circles I run in, famous, an item from the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, the first official hardcover campaign, Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, though I forget which book it's actually in. Either way, the item is called Insignia of Claws. It doesn't require attunement, and is simply a creature wearing the insignia gets +1 to its attack and damage rolls with unarmed strikes and natural weapons. That is literally built for dragons, so it fits. Then again, our Drake isn't actually going to be attacking that much after a certain level, probably, so it's not hugely important, but it could be cool to have at least, and it doesn't require attunement, so pretty low cost in that sense. A Saddle of the Cavalier is a must if you can get it. While the creature is wearing the Saddle of the Cavalier and we are mounted in it, we can't be dismounted against our will as long as we are conscious. And attack rolls against the mount have disadvantage. I was talking about that a bit earlier in regards to the fighting styles, but having it flat, disadvantage against the Drake at all times while we're riding them is incredibly useful. Otherwise, just things that will raise our attack power, magic weapons, Belt of Giant Strength, things like that. The usual sort of fightery stuff. And beyond that, just any wondrous items that we think are cool. I'm a big fan of the Helm of Brilliance, so it would allow us to light our lance on fire. That's just kind of a personal preference there. In conclusion, I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you this is the best build ever. This is going to be the highest damage, tankiest, crazy, kill everything kind of guy. With a +2 lance, which we can get via our 3rd level magic weapon spell, if nothing else, we're averaging 20.5 damage on each of our 2 attacks with the attack action. That's not half bad. And with our bonus action, the back end attack dealing another 11.5 roughly, we're looking at about 52.5 damage total. That's not the highest. It's not terrible. That's more than most spells would do. Anything short of like a Disintegrate. It doesn't compare to, say, a fighter making 4 attacks, for example, but fighters also can't cast spells to deal AoE damage or aid our party with healing and support magic, things like that. Everything has its strengths and weaknesses. Plus, we have a dragon. S tier. Anyway, that's about all I wanted to say for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found the build interesting. If you're looking to try out a mounted build, this could be a very cool one to do, although it comes online a little bit later than I would like. That level 7 feature. Keeping in mind you will still need to use it as a controlled mount, means it won't be able to attack. If you want it to move during your turn, which you do. I guess it wasn't quite all I wanted to say on the topic. Now it is. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and ride a dragon into the heat of conflict like a boss. Happy adventuring in 2025.